Patrick Cook here. What you just saw was an animation that I had published back in February of 2023 that I titled Hydra. It is a Mandelbulb 3D animation that was made with the Mandelbulb 3D Fractal generator software application that you see on the screen here. Now, this Mandelbulb 3D software application was created back in 2010 with one of the primary developers by the forum name of Jesse. And he had a number of other people that assisted him with the with authoring the Mandelbulb 3D software. Well, here it is, 13 years later, and the software is still available. It's free, and it easily obtained and installed. I like the fact that the software does not call home. There is no big corporate conglomerate behind it that's trying to nickel and dime everything out of it. There's no subscription to it. I like that fact, you know. The downside is that it doesn't get updates that often. There really doesn't seem to be a huge community behind it in terms of maintaining its code base and updating it, adding new features. But sometimes that's not all that bad. All right, so I very much enjoy working with the Mandelbulb 3D software for a couple reasons. Number one is it can do an absolutely amazing job when it comes to high resolution 3D Mandelbrot animations. Now, when I say Mandelbrot, basically the Mandelbulb is a Mandelbrot that has had spatial coordinates applied to it in the math. This is all about math, by the way. This is all math. The nice thing about the Mandelbulb 3D software is you don't need to understand the math in order to in order to produce some really amazing graphics and animations. So what I like about the Mandelbulb 3D software is that you can produce very high quality, high resolution graphics in the nature of the Mandelbulb type of fractal graphic. And you can also produce some amazing animations. Here we're looking at the Mandelbulb main form, and right now I'm showing the first keyframe of the Hydra Animation in its full 1920 by 1080 resolution. This is keyframe number one. Now I'm going to talk about keyframes here in just a few minutes. Now, basically, the way that you create a Mandelbulb graphic is you utilize the formulas. Let me turn on the formulas tab for you here. All right. And turn off the animator, the navigator. So here we have the formulas panel. In the case of Hydra, it is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4 formulas. Now these formulas are alternating. That's what this alternate tab means. The formulas are alternating. So the one formula will form the pixel locations, and the next formula influences that, and the next formula is that, and they alternate between one another to produce ultimately the graphic that you see on the screen. So the most simplest explanation of a Mandelbulb 3D graphic is formulas that are mixed together that will then be used to determine the location of the pixels on the main screen. All right, and that forms your graphic. So in the case of Hydra, 4 formulas are used, and that will then form a graphic similar to this. Now, certainly I can, and I did, modify these formulas until I got a graphic that I wanted to use as my animation. Now I'm going to talk about my objectives for this particular graphic in the commentary, which is coming up in this presentation. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but I did want to show you that these formulas are what make up the graphic. Now, the other thing that makes up the graphic, of course, is lighting. All right, so let me turn on the lightings tab here for you. All right, now, so the lighting tab, you could see here, I have the option of having multiple light sources. I can have up to 6 light sources. In the case of Hydra, I have 1 light source, and that's by design. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the upcoming commentary as part of this presentation. But what I wanted to do with the lighting is I wanted to accentuate the the depth. I wanted this Hydra, which is kind of, I'm trying to depict sort of like a living creature, but I wanted the depth to be in that scene. I wanted to as a matter of fact, if you look at the main here, you see here the foreground. All right, the foreground is well lit, and then the background, actually the light dissipates to the point where there is no additional detail. I wanted that effect. And one of the ways that you get that effect is you manipulate your lighting. So for instance, if we take light source number 1 here, and I'll just move the light Y angle, okay, the up and down, and you can see here how it's influencing the graphic, okay? Now, and what I'm trying to do here is to illuminate the foreground and kind of push the background off into nothingness. And that helps to solicit a sense of depth, of mystery, of never ending. All right, and here I'll manipulate the Y angle of the light source. Okay. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do with lighting is to pull out some detail deep down in the shadows, all right? But I didn't want too much detail, and I didn't want too little. See, right here, that's too little detail. But here you can just start to see the detail coming out. Well, I was shooting for that. And one of the ways that I did that would be to go to the lighting panel, and with the ambient tab, you've got some controls there that will control the ambient. Now, ambient is light that is sort of reflected everywhere. It exists. It's not specifically from a light source. It's sort of light that's bounced around. Ambient. It's just kind of in the scene. Well, I can actually utilize the ambient light to draw out some details in the distance. Now here I have too much ambient light, and therefore I've lost a sense of depth, all right, because I'm illuminating the deep down recesses of the graphic, and I want to do that. I actually want to use my ambient light to reveal some details down in the depths of this creature, but not too much detail. All right, too much, it's flat, doesn't look good. Too little, and you lose detail. So, all right. So the whole idea here was to try to give this Hydra structure a sense of depth, and the reason for that depth is because I wanted to take the viewer on a kind of a fly-through, an adventure through the graphic. But I didn't want the viewer to know where they were going. And you can do that you can simulate something like that by using lighting to hide detail, but not too much. Don't hide too much detail. See here, the viewer knows where they're going. You know, they've seen it. You know, you see it. You know where you're going. Now here, you get a sense of where you're going. You're moving, but you don't really get the full visual until you get there. That's the effect that I was going for. All right, now let's talk about the keyframing. So let me turn on the animation panel for you. And really, it comes down to getting a graphic that you like, getting your coloring, getting your lighting the way you like it, and then you take and create frames. And it's these frames that that will give you the sense of movement or animation. Now these frames are called subframes, and these frames are actually created by the software algorithm in between keyframes. So you're going to have a keyframe, which is a point in space relative to the graphic, and then you'll have another keyframe, which is another position of the camera relative to the fractal graphic. Okay, so you have two keyframes, and your keyframes have a camera position and a different camera position, and then the software will create frames in between there, or they will do what's called interpolation, where they'll create frames and move the camera steadily from this keyframe's position in space to this keyframe position in space, all relative, of course, to your graphic. So here, in the case of the Hydra project, I have created, let's see, I've created 30, no, one more than that. Let's see, here we go, 65 frames, which would give me a total of 8,075 subframes. All right. And it's really a process of getting your camera position where a place where you like it, capture a keyframe, put it up into the animation keyframe stack, all up in here. All right. And then go back down to your navigator, move your camera to a different position, and create a keyframe there. All right. So you're going to animate from one position to the next position, camera position. All right. And then the software will determine the subframes in between when you give it the go-ahead to render the subframes. All right. It really kind of boils down to that. Let's take this subframe right. Okay, right here. Let's take this subframe. I'm sorry, keyframe number 20, which would be at subframe position 2575. I'm going to pull that down into main, and then it's going to render that image of that keyframe. I'm going to blank the film so you don't have to sit here and look at the rendering going on, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at that keyframe. So let's pull that keyframe down in, and then we'll calculate it. And now here we have a full rendering at 1920 by 1080 of keyframe number 20. Now obviously I have already created keyframe 20 when I built the project, so what I'm showing you here is a keyframe that was already determined. But all I'm really trying to do here is to kind of give you a basic explanation of how you go about creating a Mandelbulb 3D animation. So I have a keyframe, all right, and then what I do is I use the navigator. Let me turn that back on for you. Turn the navigator back on, and I use the navigator, then move my camera position. In the Mandelbulb 3D environment, you are the camera. There is no up, down, left, right view. It's a forward view. You are the camera. So here I have in my navigator, I have a lower resolution rendering of the main, and I'm looking at my keyframe. So from here, it's just really a matter of moving the camera, all right, to a different position. The idea is to determine a keyframe, move your camera within the scene, and then capture another keyframe, and then back up on the animation window. When you're ready, you tell it to start rendering the animation, and it will determine all of the subframes in between the keyframes until you get out to the end, and it has created 8,075 subframes in this case. All right. So that's really what the Mandelbulb 3D application really is all about. It really comes down to, first and foremost, create your graphic. Secondly, to apply your coloring. And then thirdly, to apply your lighting. And then you determine your keyframes. Then you tell the application, go ahead and render the subframes. And when that's done, you have a series of stills that you can then pull into your video editor and assemble your final animation. I might add that the Mandelbulb 3D software does not create the animation, all right, the final video. What it does is it creates the subframes or the stills that will be utilized in creating the actual motion presentation. If you have any questions on the Mandelbulb 3D software application, put it in the comments. I'd be welcome to try to answer your questions. I did provide a 153 session tutorial series on the Mandelbulb 3D software. That's up on YouTube if you'd like to check it out. If you want to learn how to create Mandelbulb stills or animations, I think my tutorial series will help you out quite a bit. Let's now take a look at the video editing of this Hydra, and you can kind of get a sense for what's involved on creating the actual motion presentation. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Let's switch on over to the video editor. And now this is DaVinci Resolve. This is version 18.6. So this is new as of the recording of this this presentation, October 2023. So here we're looking at the DaVinci Resolve working environment. Now I'm on the editor page right now. Okay, I'm on the editor page, and what I've done is I have actually pulled in all of the subframes that were created. All right, now these are individual graphic files that are pulled into the DaVinci Resolve as a clip. All right, now in this particular case, it pulled in, okay, right. It pulled in all of the subframes, and this right here, this is also a clip, but it's a shorter version for something else that I'm doing in here. It's kind of an intro. But right here, these are subframes 1 through 8,075. Those go into the timeline on this track. All right, and then now that's being depicted right here. All right, up on my preview. All right, it really is as simple as that. DaVinci Resolve makes it very, very easy to pull in all of these individual files as a clip that then can be laid down on your timeline, and you'll see here that we have the entire presentation now on my timeline. And there, it's just really a matter of adding titling. All right, so here's titling. There is a 4K indicator right here. There's the author. And right here, here's the title, Hydra. Okay, so titling is really the next thing you add. Now, the idea is you don't want to have to do too much color correction here in your video editor. The premise is that you got your colors the way you like it over in your Mandelbulb 3D. So the whole idea behind the video editor is to really assemble the final motion, put your titling to it, and certainly your soundtrack, if you want a soundtrack. Now, so here I'm not utilizing the color correction capabilities of DaVinci Resolve all that much, which is very, very extensive. DaVinci Resolve comes in two flavors. One is a free version, and the other is a paid version, which is called Studio. Now, the Studio has additional features and functionality and capabilities that the free version does not. Everything I'm showing you here pertaining to the Hydra project can be done with the free version of DaVinci Resolve. But it has color correction capabilities. You also have a full audio editor built into the DaVinci Resolve, and you actually have where you can actually output your final. So now, hey, get DaVinci Resolve if you like it, if it's going to work for you. You will need a beefy computer that can be able to handle it. But if you have the hardware, DaVinci Resolve can actually make a very good low-cost video editor for your Mandelbulb 3D animations, as well as other uses as well. Now, just kind of in closing of this particular session, I wanted to talk a little bit about the soundtrack. Now, the soundtrack was created using the Arturia Mini Freak synthesizer, and for the longest time I was actually purchasing licenses to royalty-free music that I would then use in my Fractal animations. And I've got, I don't know, whatever, 100 or so up on YouTube. I got to a point, basically, the end of 2022, I said, I want to really create my own soundtracks. And I thought that the best way to do that might be with a synthesizer. Well, I think I was right about that, because synthesizer can do some amazing stuff. You can get software and you get hardware synthesizers. The Arturia Mini Freak is it's a hardware synthesizer, but also has a companion software that works with it. So in this case, in the case of Hydra, what I did is I recorded 2 tracks from the Arturia Mini Freak, and then I combined the 2 tracks, the 2 audio tracks, in here in DaVinci Resolve to give me a kind of a final soundtrack of mixed tracks. Let's just take a moment here and just kind of view it very briefly here. Let's just play 30 seconds on the timeline. Here we go. So that just gives you a very brief idea of the visual and the audio, as well as the other components that go into your presentation. So with the 8,075 subframes that the Mandelbulb 3D animation created or rendered out, I brought them into DaVinci Resolve Video Editor to complete the motion presentation along with titling and the soundtrack. All right. So why don't we move on to a commentary, and I'd like to explain a couple things that I did when it actually came to the animation, the creation of the animation itself. Okay, so stick around and take a look at the commentary on Hydra, which is coming up right now. What I wanted to do with Hydra is to depict a living creature, not a moving, undulating creature, but more of a static creature. And I wanted the viewer to get a sense that they were visiting. They were visiting the creature. They were not there to disturb. They're not there to frighten or manipulate, and they never touch. So it was important that my camera never actually collided with the Hydra fractal image. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was to depict a sense of depth with using shadowing. So I wanted to use shadowing to show detail down in the depths, but not so much detail that the viewer forgot that they are moving through a three-dimensional scene. I didn't want the viewer to know where they were going. All right, I wanted it to be a surprise. They move in on something, just like this scene right here. They move in on something. As they get closer, the details spring out more. The creature undulates a little bit. Okay, and that was a complex animation where I had to animate the properties as well as the camera. It was important that the viewer never actually collided or touched the object because otherwise it would have given a sense of not a real structure. Okay, they just would have the camera would have gone right through it, and it wouldn't have been a realistic structure. I chose monochrome, that is one color, for a very specific purpose. I didn't want a vibrant colors in the scene. I felt that the single color would give a sense of mystery, of a life form, okay? And so that's why it's predominantly green. I wanted the viewer to, movement was quite important too. I wanted the viewer to have a sense of being entangled, okay? Entangled with this living creature, moving in and out and around and pulling back. You know, and actually part of the movement, the sense that I was trying to give is the creature alive? Like, take this scene right here, for instance. Is the creature growing, or is the viewer moving through the object? See, I wanted to have a sense of the viewer not quite knowing what was going on. Is the creature growing, or am I moving through the creature? All right. The whole thing was a sense of mystery. That was what I was going for. Where are we? What are we doing here? What is this thing? I come close, like in this scene right here. I bring the viewer very close to the object, sort of as a kiss goodbye. And then the creature undulates, and then the creature goes off in the distance, or the viewer is pulling back. It could go either way. So there you go. So that's what I was thinking when I put together the Hydra animation. I hope you enjoy it. I had a really good time making Hydra, and that's how I made it. So thanks for listening. You take care.